It was the end of summer, on August 28, when the man's wife asked him to separate from her. The reason he accepted the sudden proposal so readily was, for some strange reason, the timing. Looking back on the man's life, women would always suddenly break up with him around the end of summer. When this happened, the other woman would usually start to become distant, and then the irreversible breakup talk would begin, with actually. None of the women who left like that ever came back. The same was true for his wife. And like most women who appeared in the man's life, in these cases there was already a new man. To make matters more complicated, in his wife's case, that other man was his colleague. A colleague who was 2 years younger than him and worked in the same department became his wife's new partner. The colleague was single, and had just broken up with his girlfriend last year. The whole thing started when he listened to his story and felt a strange kindness to encourage him. One Sunday, the man invited him to a beer festival in his hometown. The project was for about 10 companies to set up beer stalls in a park in town, and in the 5 years since it began, it had grown in scale and become quite a popular project. The man and his wife listened to their colleague's story while sitting at a simple table set up outdoors. The reason he had brought his wife along was because, rather than just the men discussing it, it would be nice to hear a woman's opinion. Such stories were common among the people around him. But in the case of the man and his wife, it went beyond the bounds of common stories. What was the trigger? When did they get closer? When did they start having physical relations? When did they meet? Late at night in the kitchen, the wife answered all of the man's questions. In between words, she said, "I'm sorry." Can that be called sincerity? Honest truth was sometimes the same as innocent violence. Ultimately, it seemed that the 2 nights when the man returned to his parents' house for a memorial service and recited sutras with his relatives were fateful days for them. The man also said that he wanted to break up with her. "We had talked about not seeing each other again, but then she cried in front of me," his wife said. "What's with the tears?" The man wondered. He felt he could cry as much as he wanted at this point, but it was clear to his wife that the man's tears and his colleague's tears had different values. No matter how much the man cried, it was clear that his wife wanted to get out. They didn't have any children, so in the end, this was not so different from a couple breaking up. Above all, for him, it was a breakup at the end of summer. When he remembered that all the women he had dated up until then had left around September, he felt his desire to keep his wife disappear somewhere. It was a troublesome story, but that's just how life goes, the man thought, and accepted the situation rather calmly. His wife rented a single room in the same city. Around the time that his wife's separation was decided, one of his colleagues contacted him. He contacted her and asked her to give him some time, so the two of them met again at a cafe near the workplace. "It's come to this," the colleague said in a tone that sounded strangely apologetic. If he had wanted to, he could have scolded her to her face, but when it came to actually being in front of his colleague, the man nodded and muttered, "That's a problem." It was clear from the tone of the conversation that the other person was probably worried about the compensation, but the man had no intention of making things complicated about that. In other words, he could be said to be the victim, but he had no intention of making a big fuss about it. In that respect, the man was calm. More than anything, it was difficult to deal with the wife who appeared in the conversation between the two men. The man still spoke to her as if she were his wife, but the colleague spoke of her as if she were his property. On 2 occasions, he was annoyed that his coworker called his wife by her name. In the hour-long discussion, the man and his coworker agreed that he wanted to wait a little longer before divorcing his wife, and that he would stop sleeping with her until things were settled. Surprisingly, the coworker was also willing to do the same. Whatever the outcome, he said, he would take responsibility for what had happened. Both of his coworker's parents had already passed away, so there were no complications with the marriage. As long as the man's side was settled, there would be no problem. In every word he said, he could see a strange stubbornness in his coworker's mouth, not wanting to show even the slightest bit of weakness to the older man. The room his wife had found was a 1-room apartment in the same city. The man had gone to see it once, and it seemed that his wife had returned to being single. As soon as he saw what appeared to be his coworker's personal belongings scattered openly on the bookshelves and in the bathroom, he felt nauseous and quickly left the room. At this rate, any promises he made with his coworker seemed suspicious. Like slime that has been stretched too long, by the time February rolled around, the divorce was finally decided. By that time, almost none of his wife's belongings were left in the house, and all that was found was a small Wedgwood cup she had made at the back of the cupboard. It was a beautiful cup, shaped like a flower, and difficult to wash or drink from, but the man left it there. At the beginning of April, word spread quickly that his coworker had remarried. Because of who he was, some people at work seemed reluctant to tell him about it, but his coworker had been transferred and was no longer working at the head office since April. This was probably due to the consideration of the Human Resources Department, but overall it was a sympathetic measure towards the man. Even though he had been transferred, they were still in the same company, so the man would occasionally see his coworker stopping by the head office. They probably felt the same way, but just seeing each other in their field of vision created a tense atmosphere. Of course, they never spoke. Before he knew it, his colleague had a gold wedding ring on his finger. He knew it would happen, and thought he'd prepared himself for it, but he felt sick and left work early that day. The man had gotten into the habit of taking walks on Saturdays and Sundays. Whenever he was alone at home, he couldn't help but imagine his colleague and his wife. Just thinking about his wife's smile and behavior next to his colleague made the time unbearable. Despite this, he couldn't think of any way to deal with the pain. It would have been better to stay outside. As he walked, checking out the scenery that he usually just drove past, he made many discoveries. There was a ramen shop he hadn't seen before, a park that would become a housing complex after redevelopment, and the members-only pool that he had been using as a newlywed had moved without him realizing it. Whether it was because of the walking he was doing, or because he was depressed, the man began to lose weight. He had been a little chubby until then, but he was starting to lose weight again. On the other hand, a few gray hairs were starting to become noticeable, but the man didn't seem to mind it. From Monday to Friday I would work normally in a suit, and on weekends I'd change into casual clothes and go for walks. The range of my movements just kept expanding. After 6 months, he found a regular place. It was a typical local Chinese restaurant called you.I. The restaurant was on a corner, next to a closed electronics store. Across the street was a delivery center for delivery companies, and men wearing hats and work clothes were often seen coming and going. The shop's Narian was new, but that was the only new thing. Pushing the door open and going inside, he found a friendly elderly couple running the place. There were 5 tables and a 2-seater counter. The shop had an old-fashioned look, with white tables and green metal chairs. The raccoon figurine on the counter was also completely blackened and imposing. Strangely, you.I. never had more than 4 customers at any one time. Whenever the man went there were only a few people at the tables, or sometimes only the man, so it didn't seem like it was thriving. After filling his own water from the self-service dispenser, the man ordered his usual Tianjin rice and dumplings. Then, he would turn his eyes absent-mindedly to the TV that was still on. Most of the time it was the news or a rerun of a drama. "Hey, are you a college student?" 6 months later, on a Sunday in October, the restaurant owner suddenly called out to him as he brought the food. This had never happened before. "Of course not," the man denied it. "I'm almost 40. "Oh, I see," the owner nodded. "People look younger these days. From my perspective, everyone looks the same. Thank you as always." With that, the owner placed a bowl of tenshine in front of the man. The man didn't particularly mind the exchange, so he went to you.I. restaurant again the following Saturday. The owner began to talk to the man about random things, and his wife listened to him with a smile in the kitchen at the back. One day in December, he was served beer even though he hadn't ordered it. When the man said that, the owner replied that the shop would be closed at the end of the year. "He's got a bit of a leg problem. It's not surprising considering we're both getting older. So we're closing this shop and going to live with our son and daughter-in-law in Nagoya." The owner pointed to his wife in the kitchen. She must have heard what he was saying, but she kept silent as usual, even as she continued to wash the dishes. When the man said that he was also from Nagoya, the owner was pleased with the coincidence. The owner told him the address of his son and daughter-in-law in Nagoya. He did as he was told and looked up the name of the shop on his smartphone, and found that it was a bakery. The simple brown and white shop had an impressive sign with a cute group of 4 bread makers, like an illustration in a picture book. There was also a review that sounded like a local saying, "I often buy croissants when I'm walking around the neighborhood, and the croissants made by the owner, who trained in Tokyo, are fragrant, crispy and delicious." At the end of August, the man returned to his parents' home. His family didn't say anything about his divorce. His mother just said, "It's going to be lonely." When he returned and looked around his room and the living room again, there was nothing that reminded him of his wife who had left. It was as if he had never been married to begin with. The reason he spent the weekend at his parents' home and left the house earlier than usual was because he remembered the story of the Chinese restaurant owner. The restaurant was the 5th train stop from the man's local station. He got off the station, walked up a hill lined with second-hand bookstores and dentists on either side, and walked to the residential area where the restaurant was located, but there was no bakery. Instead, there was a store that he didn't know what it was doing. The store's appearance was just as he had seen it in the photo before, so the man went inside. There was a counter in the slightly dimly lit store, and inside was a woman, her age was unclear, looking at a tablet. The woman also seemed surprised by the man's sudden entrance. When the man asked what kind of shop it was, the woman said something unexpected: she hadn't decided yet. She had just been put in charge of the shop through a relative's introduction, and today she was just here to check it out. The woman had been in New Zealand until recently and had only just returned last month. The man thanked her and tried to leave, but the woman stopped him. She then said something strange: would she like to go and do some fortune telling? In fact, she was thinking of doing something that combines fortune telling and counseling. She said it would be more appropriate if she put a more relaxing sofa here and tried some creative lighting, the woman said, speaking as if the man was a business partner. The woman was certainly friendly. In the end, the man sat at the counter as she told him to. You're the first customer, you see. I had a feeling that someone was coming. The woman boiled water in the pot on the counter and served the man coffee. Then she took out a worn book and a notebook from her bag. Although she said it was a fortune telling, all the woman asked was the man's date of birth. She said it would be a problem if she got this wrong, so she had to be absolutely honest. She then asked what his favorite color was and what animal he didn't like, and that was it. She said she'd make the price half price as an exception, but the man, not knowing the going rate for fortune telling, paid 4,000 yen as she was told, and the woman left the counter for a while and went somewhere. After being left alone for about 5 minutes, when the man had finally finished his coffee, the woman finally returned and asked when she would come again. It takes a while to interpret it. At least 3 days. There are some things you can't understand until you see the flow of the stars. The man didn't quite understand what the woman was saying, but he explained the situation and told her that he had no plans to return to Nagoya for a while. That's a problem, the woman muttered, not seeming particularly bothered, but she didn't seem to be thinking of refunding the money. Then I want you to write the results down on paper and send them to me, the man said, as if it had just occurred to him. Thinking that giving her his email address might cause some trouble, he ended up telling her the address of his apartment and left the shop. It was only then that he realized, belatedly, that he had written his name. I had completely forgotten about the fortune telling. It was only about 2 months after I returned home that I finally remembered when I found a letter in my mailbox. When I looked at the sender on the envelope, it had a handmade stamp that read Fortune Telling Café Coral. It seemed like they had opened a shop. But it was pretty random, and I chuckled wryly, remembering the woman. On a before-sized piece of paper, there was a table that the man couldn't understand and some kind of symbol printed on it. On top of that, there were some writings written in a woman's handwriting. In the left margin of the paper, the man's fortune-telling results were written. You were raised by your parents and were treasured by them. They are involved in some kind of business. They must have a store or real estate or something. Your parents respected your wishes, but in reality, they wanted you to take over your father's business. You got married between the ages of 32 and 35, but that was difficult. Your wife will marry someone else, but that's something you don't need to think about anymore. Your money will flow well from the ages of 42 to 44. A new person will appear before you, probably at the end of summer. Someone you know will return, but it won't be your ex-wife. You may start a new job around that time. There won't be any problems if you change jobs. Your throat is weak, so be careful. It will get better again around the age of 50, so prepare for your retirement at that time. After 6 years, the man talked to his new wife about his fortune telling. He remembered the piece of paper he had left in the drawer. The new wife was easygoing, and accepted that the man had been married before. She was also remarrying. They probably wouldn't have children in the future, but they both had a premonition that they could get along quite well. We've both been through a lot, they often said, but that was just the right buffer. Looking back at the fortune now, there were some things it was right about and some things it wasn't. The man didn't remember having a lot of money, but he was sure that she had shown up at the end of summer. It was also right about him starting a new job, but it was more of a transfer than a job change. He was moving to a branch in the Tokay region after getting married. That colleague had already quit her job. Let's go get that fortune told sometime, his new wife said. In terms of batting average, it's about 60% accurate, so it's pretty good. Plus, I want to have my fortune told, too. She remembered the place, so the following Sunday they went together. The dental clinic and second-hand bookstore that could be seen on both sides of the hill were still there, but the place where the store used to be was now a vacant lot, with a rope and a sign saying no trespassing in front. There were 2 black cats standing next to the exposed rubble, and when they noticed them approaching, they quickly ducked into a gap in the gutter and disappeared from sight. A few years later, a new shop opened in that spot, and when the two passed by it in their car on their way to their new home, it had already been transformed into a white 6-story apartment building.